Hello, and welcome to another episode of Your Therapist Needs Therapy, the podcast where mental health professionals get together and talk about their mental health journeys and how they navigate wellness while working in the mental health field. I'm your host, Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I am joined by Erin Jones. Erin, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me, Jeremy.
I'm terrible host. I always talk about things we talk about before we got started. This is your first podcast, so
Yeah.
welcome to the club.
Thanks. Yeah, it's exciting. I've like been on some panels before, but never like a one-on-one podcast like this. So it's very interesting.
Sure.
It'll be better.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved the podcast in the sense that I keep meeting new therapists, people from outside my circles. I'm in the Midwest, in Wisconsin specifically, and as a marriage therapist, like it's the super tiny circle. And so like I know all these people in my area, but this is a good example of like you and I hadn't super really crossed paths. It's kind of just because of the podcast. So
Yeah.
it's really fun to meet people who are outside of my circles and doing work that is helping people in other places.
Yeah, that's always so fun. It's always just such a delight to like get to connect with any other points of light out there, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the question I always like to start with is, how did you get into the mental health profession?
Let's see. Well, my mom is a social worker. So I kind of like grew up with that mindset and framing and way of thinking.
Hmm.
And I think I just knew from a really early age that that was like kind of like what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people and I wanted to like do something that was going to feel really fulfilling for me. And my mom was very fulfilled, in her work. And yeah, like that was sort of really like what it was about for me. And I like found, human beings in general just like a fascinating subject. Like trying to figure out, how we work the way we work. And, like I come from a family where there's a lot of generational trauma. And so like having that capacity and that understanding, kind of on a younger level, like really, I guess sort of like kicked me up there a little bit in like my own journey too.
Sure. So was that like a thing that you knew from pretty young, like wanting to help people, but then having a parent who worked in social work, so kind of knowing like that's a good avenue, or was that like you did the college undergrad, change your major, see, kind of figure out that type of stuff?
No, I was taking AP Psych courses in high school.
Okay.
I went and got my bachelor's in clinical psych, and then it was, do I want to go get a PhD or do I want to go get a 2-year degree master's? And I opted to go get the master's because I was tired of school at that point. Like I went straight.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was very like, driven and focused in that particular direction. Um,
Sure.
yeah. So yeah, I think it was just always like a feeling and like, I'm skilled at it. I'm really intuitive. I'm like very good at like reading people and figuring out like mind maps. So like it just kind of
Yeah.
lent itself pretty easily like for me.
Yeah. So that's awesome. I had a similar experience, I think, in like knowing what I wanted to do. I think it was figuring out within the field of psychology what that actually looked like once I got into it, because it is a wide and expansive thing.
Yeah.
Um, but similar, like went for psych, knew I was psych. I dropped pre-med, but then what's your experience been in the profession as far as like weaving towards finding, the people you like working with and finding how you like to operate? What has that been like for you?
Um, it's definitely been a journey. I mean, like in Maryland, we have like for our licensure, it's like 144 hours of supervision. And when I finished graduate school, you couldn't work one-on-one doing individual therapy with people outside of an agency setting. Like you couldn't
Hmm.
be in a private practice. So my first 6 years were spent in like working in treatment foster care. So I worked at like a transitional living facility, and like that was cool. I was working with queer youth, but it was like the the org when I joined it, like it was Era Child and Family Ministries, and they were very like, oh, we are we're like not really pressed on like all of the religious stuff. Like it's not a big deal. But as I stayed there longer, they got more and more so, and it was very homophobic. So
Sure.
I think that kind of like kicked off to me like I definitely want to be working, within queer community, with kids. I worked in therapeutic foster care afterward, just doing case management. I needed a break. So I went from doing like being like a one-on-one individual therapist and wearing 20 hats like you do in nonprofits. And, then I went for another couple of years. And then I joined a group practice. And, I was pretty clear that I wanted to work in the queer community, that I wanted to work with people in like non-traditional, like ethically non-monogamous relationships, people who are involved in alternative lifestyles in general. So I think I found my niche pretty early on. And that was like,
Sure.
now everybody's polyamorous, but like when I started doing that work, it was not like that at all. So it's really neat to see it growing and expanding and there being more therapists. But when I started, there were like maybe 3 of us, I think, in the general area. So yeah, like that was really, I think I just was pretty clear like that there was a need there and I wanted to work within my own communities. And then, when the pandemic hit, we switched to doing virtual sessions and I was like, okay, well, this is cool. I've always been like pretty like avid outdoor person. So I decided to like alter my model and now I do virtual sessions and then I do therapy out in the woods. I take people for walks and, hang out in the forest. So that's great. It's
Yeah.
like I really often feel like how did I get that fortunate that that's what I get to do every day for work.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna nitpick some questions in there and dig some stuff out, but I think that's awesome, and I absolutely want to circle back and talk about how you're practicing now, because that's very cool. So I'm curious, kind of in your experience. Then you talk about you started out at this agency and it got more and more conservative, but then you also have this experience of like the poly community has really spread out and become much more socially accepted. And
Mhm.
you joked everybody's poly now. I'm in very conservative Wisconsin, so I can attest to the fact that that's not true. But also, like I had a similar experience. I started out working at a religiously affiliated organization,
Mhm.
and have seen kind of like this weird homogenization, like the religious community getting almost more and more limited in who they're doing outreach to, whereas society at large is getting more and more accepting and open-minded.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really like by the end of it, I really couldn't stay there like on a matter of principle. Like I was working with teenage girls 16 to 21, in foster care. Like they were supposed to be doing transitional living and, you know, most of them were queer or like, we had a lot of kids that were trans, even though they might not have known that, fully yet. And the agency rules were like they wouldn't let the girls hug one another or like be in each other's rooms and I was like, bro, like they're not going to get pregnant, like
Right.
touch is good, like
Right.
figuring out how a safe connection is good. I'm not necessarily advocating that like you like turn down the lights and put some music on, but like allowing them to have that kind of connection, like it became so stringent and so intensive. And when I started, yeah, it wasn't as much like that, but it got more and more so. And I probably stayed for like a year longer than I should have. I was pretty burnt when I left,
Yeah.
because of the way. But yeah, like no, that was fine. And my next agency was like really, it was foster care. So it was still hard, in terms of just like what, kids are dealing with, but it didn't have those, tones of homophobia and, sort of things like that.
Sure. So how are you kind of navigating that for yourself as a therapist early in your career, getting like your feet underneath you in your profession and being like, hey, this doesn't like vibe with me. This isn't aligning with where I want to be working. Like, was that something that you were aware of right away? Was that something that you like had a consult group that you worked through it with or your own therapist? Like, how did you kind of navigate that?
Well, I mean, I think I went into it knowing that that was not where I wanted to end up. That was, I'm going to do this work to get my, clinical hours that I need and supervision. And then I'm going to get I don't know if I can swear on here, and then I'm going to get the fuck out. That was,
You can swear on here.
yeah. Like, okay, good. So yeah, that was pretty much it. I knew that it was going to be temporary. And, yeah, like I had a therapist there when I was there. I didn't really like her all that much. So, my current therapist I've been with for like 10 years now, and she's amazing. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think it was kind of just like, all right, I'm going to do this for as long as I can do it and, get those hours that I need for licensure and then get out. And, I have never been particularly quiet about how I feel and think. So I wasn't. And, I got a lot of blowback. At one point, they were like, don't talk to them about sex. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
Like, um, so, I I definitely like slammed that door pretty hard when I left. Like I was just like, I'm done with you people and you're not doing it right. And I was pretty clear about that, I
sure.
think. Yeah,
Did
I've
you?
not shied away from having opinions.
Yeah. Did you feel like you had? It almost sounds like you feel like you didn't really have great opportunity coming out of grad school for where you wanted to work. Looking at like how you're working now, I know that I own my own practice and run it the way that I'm happy running it, but like that wasn't a thing that I knew was possible coming out of grad school.
Yeah.
That was not an option anyone talked
Mm-mm.
about, and definitely didn't promote.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's changed now so that coming out of graduate school, like, people can work independently as long as they have supervision, can work, doing one-on-one therapy. But I mean, I imagine that we're probably close to the same age. Maybe I'm
Hmm.
40. I don't know how old you are, but in 2008, which was when I finished grad school, like, yeah, no, there really weren't any options other than working for an agency or working for a hospital or, some sort of like more managed care with lots of bureaucracy and like a bunch of stupid things that they wanted you to do that were duplication of effort. And, I don't
Yeah.
have to, I don't have to explain that to you. That's how it was. There weren't any options for that. So it was like, do this thing so that you can go do it the way you want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I agree that's changed. I'm a little bit younger than you, but not significantly. And it's one of those things where I look at young people coming out of grad school now and they're like interested in opening their own practices. And I was like, that's awesome. That should absolutely be what we're promoting. But, I graduated, my grad school was 2009 to 2011, and I was not at all aware that it was even an option to own your own place.
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't, I don't think for us at that point in time, now it is, but that's really only been within the last probably like a little bit pre-pandemic, I think, where they were starting to let like LGs or LCs or people with with their um I guess graduate like licenses, not their full clinical licenses, like do
Yeah.
that work. So it's
Yeah.
really recent, I think.
Yeah. Did you come out of grad school with your LCSW or were you a LPC?
LCSWC, yeah. So,
Okay. So,
yeah.
and for those non-therapy people who are listening, the three of you who listen to the podcast that aren't therapists, that's licensed clinical social worker versus licensed practitioner counselor. LPC is kind of like the generic, um, I don't know, kind of like your family doctor who has like a base training and everything, but doesn't have a super specialty. LCSW is focused more on the clinical social work side of things.
Mhm.
Um, and so hence your experience working in like foster care and doing some of that agency work on that side of things.
Yeah.
I've talked about this. I went the LPC and then I went and got my LMFT right away. So I focus on couples therapy pretty much from the get go. But I think
Mhm.
in social work, especially, like there is a little bit of a feeder system into this agency work. You stay for 5 or 6 years, inevitably burn out, and then like kind of move into your actual profession. It seems, and manipulative is maybe a little bit strong of a word, but like I think there's an aspect to it that is, here's these young people who are coming out of grad school, they have debt, they don't know what they're doing yet. We're going to offer them a steady salary and also like shitty working conditions, but they're going to take it because they don't have other options.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There are no other options. We're going to pay them the bare minimum, like, capitalize on the fact that they need supervision and all of those things. And like, yeah, and in nonprofit work, you wear a million hats, especially if you're at all competent. Like by the time I left the first agency, I was like part of the administrative team and I was doing all of our admissions. Like I was like, okay, like it's cool. I don't mind this. It's getting me out of the office. So like that's fine. I'll go meet with people elsewhere. But yeah, I think there really is that feeder. And it's kind of, you think about it really like I came out of that pretty much being like, well, it doesn't really matter what happens going on in the future because it's never going to be as hard as that. Like, I was like, pretty much at that point, like nothing is going to really like rock me too well,
Sure.
rock me too intensely. So that was kind of a nice thing. Like, one of those things to go into private practice with was like, well, like it's basically going to be much easier from here on in. So
Yeah.
I did take that one, but yeah, no, I mean, the burnout rate is like so high, and you really have, people who are young and don't have a lot of experience working with populations that are so high intensity. I never like engage with like people in the space, that here now than that I did like in those agencies like the level just of intensity and need for care is so much higher, so you've got inexperienced people in shitty working conditions working with populations that are, you know, far, far more, uh, require a lot more, from you as a practitioner.
Yeah.
So, oh, it's totally a feeder system. It's gross.
Yeah. Yeah, the more I talk to different people who are in different geographic locations, the more I'm like, oh no, like this is a structural thing, not an like weird quirk of the Midwest where mental health services are limited. Um, but now, owning your own private practice, running things the way you do,
Yeah.
walking in the woods. Tell me a little bit about, because it sounds like you knew your niche early on. Niche. It's one of those words that I hate saying out loud because different people pronounce it differently.
Yeah, I know.
Uh,
I'm quite sure.
but you knew you wanted to work within the queer community. You knew that you wanted to be helping that specific population. How did you kind of move to like, we're going to do nature walks, we're going to walk and talk, we're going to process things that way? Like, was that a training you picked up somewhere? Was that just something that vibed for you personally? Kind of how did building your practice that way come about?
Well, when I was in that first homophobic agency, I will say that the grounds were really nice. It was on an old farm. So
Hmm.
um, I used to take the kids out for walks. I grew up in a really rural area, like on a farm actually. So like, nature was always like my medicine. And so like, taking the kids for walks, like I noticed that they really did a lot better. And then, as I continued in training and learned about bilateral stimulation and, all of the benefits of being in nature as far as like, putting your brain in a meditative state, but like walking, right? It is bilateral stimulation and the eyes are tracking while you're moving. And I don't, I'm sure that's the underlying principle for EMDR, right? So like
Right.
um, I think I've tended to find that like some of the things that are the most profoundly healing are some of the things that are the most simple. Um,
Hmm.
like go take a walk, go take a shower, spend a little time outside, take some breaths.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it started like I left my group practice like in the center of like in the middle of the pandemic. I had a personal like loss. My other parrot who I had had for 16 years passed really suddenly, and I was like, that was really heavy. And then at the same time, we were switching EHRs. So,
Hmm.
and the EHRs that the owner of the practice chose were just like not good EHRs. And I was like, I literally cannot cognitively learn how to do this mess. So I just was like, all right, time to go. I kept all of my clients for the most part. Like people came with me,
Yeah.
you know, and I also knew that like I wanted to get out of working with insurance. You know, I struggled with that one for a really long time because I believe so deeply in accessibility, but I was just like, I can't, you know,
Yeah.
if I like run my own practice with maybe some other people and have a billing service, like that would be cool, but like for just me, like nah, I'm not going to do that. And yeah, like I'm an avid hiker, an avid outdoors person. You know, I'm like in kind of remission from fibromyalgia right now. So like as I started to get better and like be more able to like engage with nature and be more embodied, like I took that and was like, wow, this is so like healing and helpful for me. Like, oh, okay, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We can't really meet with people face to face. Like, why don't I go for walks outside in the woods? So, you know, we started that way, you know, doing masked walks outside so people could get, you know, some face to face time. And it just sort of like moved from there. And then it was funny, like I started seeing all of these, like the Center for Nature and the Environment, you know, or Nature and Therapy, and like everybody doing these, like, you know, all of the trainings and all of the certification and turning it into a thing that's monetized. And I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, like that's cool, but you know, I think it was very interesting to be like, ah, this is a thing, and then suddenly to see it kind of coming out that way. And I'm sure the pandemic had to do with that too, because people were like,
Oh,
how do,
for sure.
yeah, oh, okay, now we'll be outside and do this. So yeah, no, it was really just kind of, yeah, like reading the room, if you will, and my own, you know, really having my own benefit from it, and having had the experience of how beneficial it was to the kids when I was working with them before.
Sure. Yeah. Um, I'm doing my ADHD thing where I have 8 different questions I want to ask at once. What for you is it like working, especially with like the queer population? I know on your website you have like ethical non-monogamy and some of those other um, relationship setups listed as things you work with. What is it like in our like modern times where on the one side society is moving to be more accepting and open-minded about these things, and then also like the trans community especially, but the LGBTQ plus community at large is really under attack from political bad actors?
Yeah. You know, it's beautiful and it's heavy. Um, and sometimes it's, you know, joyful and transformative. Um, like the trans kids that I work with, you know, and it's neat. Like I have some now that I started seeing when they were like 14, and like now they're, you know, getting their master's degree in public health. Like, um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but the kids that I have, you know, now like they're just so with it. You know, my trans kids are just so with it, and they are so aware, and they are so like actively doing the work to nurture and care for one another, to help each other regulate. So it's heavy, you know, we talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
we we sit with that, and then we also kind of, you know, sit with the idea that like pursuing joy and healing and contentment, like that in and of itself is revolutionary, and is sort of the thing that we have to, you know, kind of keep our eye on moving, because, you know, you want to be aware of those things certainly and feel them and process them, but you can't live in that space.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, some days it's heavy, some days, you know, it's scary, um, you know, but I think like helping people to stay sort of in the present and like focused on their own pathways towards liberation and safety, you know, is kind of how we move through in that way. You know,
Yeah.
we'll make, you know, references, and I mean, and that's the thing, like I'm an anti-capitalist, like very decolonizing my therapy practice, so we talk about systems and capitalism and colonialism and all of these things all the time, you know, in terms of like, this is not you,
Yeah.
this system that is causing this. Like I swear like 90% of my job is saying it's not you, it's capitalism, in like some very in some variation. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of like, the awareness of all of those things is very interwoven in practice. But
Hmm.
I noticed that it's also really helpful, like having, the kids outside on walks, like having the opportunity to just like not have to work so hard to regulate their nervous systems because the forest
Yeah.
doesn't do that. Um,
Yeah. No, let's talk about that because obviously most of the people who are listening to this podcast are other practitioners or people who are already nerdy about therapy. But I still think trauma informed care is way less common than it should be. And even I think people who think they understand or at least know about trauma but aren't actively working with trauma are missing a lot of things that those of us who work with trauma are like, no, 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 like this is how it works. You need these things. So you talked about bilateral stimulation before, which is good, but nerdier than I want to get right now. So let's talk about like the central nervous system. So what is it about trauma? Sorry, I'm not meaning to make this a pop quiz for you, but I nerd out about this stuff. Trauma and the central nervous system. Why are those things linked? Like, how is that? Why is that a thing that as a therapist you're paying attention to for the people you're working with?
I mean, because like, trauma is a thing that is like felt bodily, trauma is a physiological response, trigger is a physiological response, right? It is your body going immediately into fight or flight or freeze or fawn. And so like working somatically, right? Like, our like what is that quote? Like I throw it out a lot that like, your brain is there to keep you safe, not to keep you happy. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, like, really having to be mindful of the fact that when we're activated, right, like before we start telling ourselves a story, like we have to address and hold our nervous system, right, and learn how to do that. And so many people don't, right? If people don't have, responsive parenting or people that can teach them how to do that, or their parents are dysregulated, within themselves, like we don't learn, right? We don't learn
Right.
how to do that. And so when a trigger activates, right, a lot of times I think, and I do a lot of parts work too, right? It's this young part, this kid nervous system, right, that we are reacting and responding to in that moment when you're thrown back,
Mm-hmm.
even trauma you're being activated around, like, is a more recent one. I think that those parts that are very like scared and feeling flooded and overwhelmed, your nervous system sort of forgets that you are an adult with tools that knows how to regulate. And sometimes people don't. So yeah, trauma in the central nervous system. Trauma is a somatic response. It's a bodily
Right.
response. And we have to work somatically because like I could sit up here and spin every single like thought or thread out, but that's not going to make my nervous system calm down. Oftentimes I'm going to just be thinking through the lens of the anxiety or the trigger, and it's going to like fold in on itself. Whereas if you like engage with the body, like that's calming it.
Yeah.
I mean, we can totally nerd out on the specifics of that process, but I'm trying to be a little
No,
bit.
I have no idea. I should track my audience better. I know a lot of therapists listen to it. I'm not sure how many people not from a psych background are listening to it, but I
Yeah.
do think I talk often about how trauma is held in the body, not in the brain, and so we can't fix it or work through it or solve it by working through the brain, which is
Yeah.
hard. Like for me, especially, I'm an intellectual. So I want to work through the brain. It's stimulating. I have ADHD. Like that makes my brain happy to think
Yeah.
intensely. Um, and I work with a lot of medical personnel. So people who are working in hospitals or nurses or people who are first responders, paramedics type things. Like all these people have trauma, but
Hmm.
they're so used to it, like intellectualizing that they know what trauma is, but not like working through the experience of trauma. And
Yeah.
so even I think something like COVID recently, all of us, most of us, I don't know, maybe there are some exceptions out there. I feel comfortable saying all of us went through a collective trauma, but then
Yeah.
like the LGBTQ community also living through ongoing traumatic times of not being allowed to feel safe or having people who they need security and safety from and not getting it from those people.
Yeah.
So I love that the idea of nature. Nature really helps to stimulate or to regulate the nervous system by stimulating all these different responses in your nervous system, because your brain is busy processing all this external stimuli, so your
Mhm.
body can actually do what it's supposed to do instead of be all haywire.
Yeah.
Um,
It's fully immersive, right? Like, we see a lot of like sound baths for healing and
mhm,
music therapy and art therapy. Like being in nature is fully immersive. You're hearing sounds, you're smelling smells. Like, it gives, yeah, that brain kind of like a place to rest a little bit, right? While your nervous system, like, kind of regulates itself. And I think that there's the perspective, right, of being in nature, of seeing ourselves as like not alone and connected to a greater web, an interspecies web. Because I think
mhm,
the other, like, we talk about like we have the trauma of COVID and the pandemic and the trauma that LGBTQ people are facing. And then we also have this trauma of like isolation and loneliness, a lack of community, a lack of connection. And so, you know, just having people like kind of held in that space of, there are other consciousness out there, like there's other forms of consciousness, there are, these trees are talking to one another underneath the ground through the mycelial network, like, seeing ourselves as connected to and part of something greater, I think is another way of like helping to regulate and even out that nervous system. Parrots have taught me that because they're flock creatures. I
mhm.
they should never be pets. They should not live inside, and they should not live without their connected community. Bones won't like will not be okay if she's not in the same room as I am, because that's what makes her feel safe, right? And so in the
Right.
act of like connection to other folks sometimes, or connection to community, like we sort of have to get that connection wherever we can. And I think that, the forest also offers us that if we can frame it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I came out of a postmodern school of thought around therapy, and so I started with narrative therapy and then moved to collaborative language. But like narrative therapy is really heavy on analogy, and I love nature because it allows for so much metaphor. Like, what season of life are you in? Look at the trees; like they go through these different seasons. They're alive and they're connected the whole time, but they're not.
Yeah.
They look different in the winter and then summer. They look different when they're a sapling versus when they've been growing for 50 years uninterrupted. So
Yeah.
I think that too, like it regulates the nervous system and being in nature, but it does allow for some of that intellectual different perspective,
Mhm.
and meaning making and metaphor building with
Yeah.
just something like going through a forest and going for a walk.
Yeah, it really does. I'm very big on metaphor and analogy. I try to, as much as possible, like explain things so that a 5-year-old could understand them, and so that means that you're breaking things down like into, a metaphor, or like some level of example that is like a little bit more easily accessible.
Yeah. What's your experience? I don't work with teens very much anymore. I have some exceptions, I guess. I work with athletes. I have too many specialties that are unrelated, but I don't. So usually it's with the athletic side. For a minute, I don't know, maybe pre-COVID, I guess I would say, I felt like a lot of youth were getting more training around like emotional skills, distress tolerance. They were doing some of those things, and now we've kind of seen this weird boomerang effect where people are pushing back for some reason, like
Hmm.
letting your kids learn how to regulate themselves is a bad thing for some reason. What's your experience with kind of like working with youth, working with teens and that younger population? Are they coming to therapy with more skills already, or is it a kind of a mixed bag?
I mean, the ones that I'm seeing are coming to it with like knowledge and awareness at 14, 15, 16 that I didn't have until my mid 20s. They are so
Hmm.
aware and so with it. And like, seeing things in a more holistic way than I ever did as a young person. So like, I think they're coming with more awareness. I think they're coming with more skills. They're coming with language, the like, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about like the pop culture, like, the therapeutic terminology that's being used all over the place, which, hey, I'm more for that than I am against it, because like, good, like, give people language, give people words to be able to talk about it and connect to others and to feel seen and understood. And I think that, with kids, because they live on the internet, most of them anyway, like they do, they already have the language, they already have the lexicon, they're coming in and self-diagnosing,
Yeah.
like for like my trans kids, like with autism, like they're diagnosing, they are like looking at what they're experiencing and naming it, and finding frames so that they're not internalizing as much, which is like really wild and cool. Yeah, like I love working with kids. The world outside might seem like pretty gross, and like there's a lot of really harmful stuff happening, and there is, but like, working with teens, working with trans teens, queer teens particularly, is just like so like affirming, as far as like, okay, well, there might be a lot of changes, but humanity, I think, is probably going to be okay if these people are in charge someday.
Yeah, definitely. I experienced that in couples working with, I would say, I'm a millennial, but younger millennials and older Gen Z, like just the way they're approaching relationships and their communication. A lot of what I end up working with is actually the intergenerational piece of it, where they're learning how to navigate the adult world and their older generations not liking their lifestyles, as opposed to
Yeah.
anything too particularly unhealthy that they're doing. So I agree. I think there's a double-edged sword with some of that self-diagnosis. In my line of work, I work with a lot of ADHD and neurodiversity, and sometimes the information people are getting from TikTok is just flatly wrong. But I do think it's helpful. I think those conversations being like out in the open is super helpful. Whether or not that information is always accurate, I think the fact that younger people are aware of these things and tackling them earlier in their development means they're coming into adulthood a little bit more fully formed, as opposed to having to figure it out in their late 20s or early 30s, like I feel like a lot of our generation did.
Yeah, like I'm definitely right on that elder millennial line, and but for sure, like 20s, 30s, I grew up like freaking like rural, like my family like was in the Pentecostal cult for like maybe a couple of years. We got out of it, thankfully, but like you know I didn't even know that non-binary was a thing that I could be. I didn't
Yeah.
have any, and I mean, and I think that's the thing, right? Like our generation like didn't have a lot of queer elders, at least not visible one. We lost so many people to AIDS, like,
Yeah.
and yeah, like what were our examples of what transness was? Like Tu Wong Fu and The Birdcage, maybe, and like Silence of the Lambs. Like, whoo, great.
Yeah.
Well, like,
Really pathologized.
yeah, very much so. And so I think, that's a big part of it too, right? Is that kids are seeing that there are so many different ways to be,
Yeah.
and like, and to have relationships in ways that are different and that work for them. Like, I've had like the experience of like my kids who have been in poly relationships for like, back and forth a couple of years, their parents then coming out to them and being like, we're trying polyamory. And they're like, yeah, okay. Like, they're just totally
Yep.
not. And they're like, yeah, dad, I know what it is. So yeah, I think it's really neat to see that, like
Mm-hmm.
even with everything that they are facing and moving into in a world in a way where they don't have like, I think that my generation, like our generation, like that millennial, there was still a little bit of like, okay, well, if you go to school and you do the right things, like then you're going to have a happy life and be safe and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
These kids, do not have that. Like they have full awareness of the fact that they're inheriting a world in serious trouble in a way that I don't think we did. And so to see them like still continuing to like love and support one another and do the work that they need to do to thrive is like, and find their people, like even in the face of all of that, is pretty like humbling and beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's easy to get bogged down in some of the negatives and those things, and focus on, like, we've had, Columbine was 99. We've had 20 plus years to fix school safety and we haven't done it, and get frustrated or get beat down with like why is this still happening? And I do think interacting with younger people, the younger generation, and seeing how they're responding to it is a much more hopeful exercise than just being doom and gloom about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here. What does self-care, what does taking care of yourself and investing in yourself at this point in your career kind of look like for you?
Well, like I said, I have a therapist who I see bi-weekly. She's wonderful. She does EMDR therapy, so we do a fair amount of that. I see a massage therapist every other week because, like I said, I had a car accident, which sort of like kicked off fibromyalgia, and also, 6 years working in treatment foster care will do that to anybody's nervous system. Uh,
Sure.
you kind of have to be an adrenaline junkie to do that sort of work, because everything's always popping off. So yeah, I see a massage therapist every other week. She's wonderful. I'm like out hiking and in nature with clients, but also like for myself, at least once a week. Like I get a little weird if I'm like not out in the woods, like at least like twice during the week. I don't do very well like being enclosed. So I know that that's a thing that I just like really need to do for myself. Music, gardens, I like totally a plant person. So
Sure.
out in the garden and like pulling weeds is very therapeutic. Like and I think again, right, like gardening is seasonal. So like and it's also like it is very in stages, which is really good for me as a person who wants the results and wants them now. Like so I think that like, it's certainly taught me patience. But yeah, like plants, I'm really into music. I haven't been to like festivals or large events in a couple of years because I got a little like on the culture there, but I'm sure I'll go
Yeah.
back and again to see some like beautiful art and like creative people and cool installations in that way. But spending time with really close friends who are also like aligned in doing their own work, people who
Hmm.
inspire me and make me want to be a better version of myself. Uh, like I've started like getting back into like reading a little bit more. I'm like revisiting bell hooks right now, which is really lovely. Spending time with family, lots of stretching. I'm in PT like once a week right now, because I had like a little disc slip. So I think it's really like, just about like taking care of body for me.
Hmm.
That was when I had to learn later in life. I was like an athlete through high school and then I played rugby in college. So like my way of working with my body was like, do the thing, like,
Yeah.
oh, do the thing. So now like really learning to be gentle, making sure I get enough sleep, that I drink a lot of water.
Yeah. No,
You
I
know,
love that. I think maybe it was on your Psychology Today profile. You have the phrase spoonies, and I actually looked it up because I was like, I don't know if that's what I think it is, and it was, but I've heard it in so kind of that metaphor of we all have a certain number of spoons to start the day off with, and each activity or task that you're going to tackle takes a spoon. I've heard it in the neurodiversity community as far as ADHD goes, that like that analogy is meaningful for a lot of people.
mhm.
Um, but I believe, I don't mean to speak for you, but the way it was written contextually in your website was for people who are dealing with chronic pain issues.
Yeah. I work with a lot of clients with chronic pain, chronic illnesses, people with POTS, a lot of folks with Ehlers-Danlos, fibromyalgia. So really working with chronic pain. And, as we know, like there's a very strong link to trauma. You don't think it's not in a way where it's psychosomatic, but literally like exposure to trauma, whether it's your own or it's generational, like is going to have an impact on the body. And if you're somebody who is born with a nervous system that is a little bit more tuned up, and then you have to capitalism, like it's gonna hit in different ways. So yeah, and I really feel like having my own like journey with chronic illness and movement through that, like like I've certainly done trainings, but like, you know, that experience of having to really count your spoons, of like the feeling of disconnect and loss of trust in your body, right? Like, how can you feel safe? How can you be settled and grounded if you don't have that trust in your body to like heal? And so that's a tricky one for folks with chronic conditions, right? And so we're
Yeah.
like, you know, trying to keep it on the level of you can still do the things. And pain psychology, right, is like, you know, you have to keep moving, really and truly.
Right.
Like not moving, not pushing it is like just going to lead to, you know, a harder time down the line, you know, looking at like physical sensations as sensations, not just a blanket of pain, and like how are they, what is it communicating to you, right?
Hmm.
So I think that, you know, being body focused is like, you know, par for the course. You absolutely have to do it that way with folks with chronic illness. But yeah, I think spoon theory is a great one, right? And I think it's really good because it also talks about like it gives a tangible for emotional energy, and that's one that I don't think we talk about very much, but like
Right.
it's a big thing, and it can help people to set emotional boundaries as well, right? Like, I can't talk to this friend today because they take a lot of spoons and I don't have that energy right now. So I think it allows for like a little bit more of a like finite and tangible way to talk about that too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I like that. And setting realistic expectations as well, being like, well, like I might do that if I have the social bandwidth for it, or I have the spoons left over for it, but I might have to say no. And I
Yeah.
think I'm seeing more and more people talk that way, and I'm seeing it like people don't care. Like, I think there's so much social pressure to say yes to things for so long. I think that's a capitalism thing. Like, doing things means you're good or accurate or correct in some way.
Mhm.
But taking care of yourself, I loved your very expansive answer to self-care. And a lot of times when I talk with clients, I'll ask what they do for stress relief, and they'll tell me one or two things, and I'm like, yeah, that's not enough, gang. And there's this idea that, like, you know, oh, I do like yoga twice a week. Like, that's a fantastic jumping off point, but you take stress on, you've got a history of trauma, like that's everyday stuff. What are we doing every day? So I love that expensive answer is I think what people really need to be shooting for. And I'm sure you feel like you don't have it nailed yet, but like it's an ongoing process, even for those of us who are in this profession, to be like, right, like
Yeah.
you're never at the finish line. It's never done.
No, we're not. And I think part of it too is like, you know, when you're holding heavy things, like it's, I think, super important to create space for wonder, for childlike enthusiasm, for just being in a space of joy, as much as we can, because what we hold is heavy. And even though, you know, I'm inspired by my clients all the time, as I'm sure you are, you know, like watching people do that work and heal, and like, God, I'm like tearing up thinking about it. Like, it is the most incredible thing to be able to be aligned with people, or, you know, walking next to them, you know, on that path. And that's great, but that's work. We also have to like really be like mindful about, I think, having fun and like
Hmm.
and being playful. You know, I think especially like those of us who are on the like more intellectual side, like I can get a little intense, right?
Yeah.
So like making sure that I have things that like, you know, are silly. Recently I've been like I'm challenging myself to fail at things, because I don't like to do things that I don't know how to do perfectly immediately, and I'm working on that. So like
Sure.
this weekend I'm gonna go take a, you know, a glass blowing class or whatever, like just for funsies to see, you know, how it is. I think like, you know, creating art, having like activities where like we're not so much in our heads, you know,
Right.
hands are in our bodies, I think is really important too. But
Yeah.
it, you know, for me, it took fibro, and it took like my body being like, yeah, no, you're done.
Yeah.
To like really like get, no, like this is how you have to do it, you know, and to like really seek that balance, and to not just like be like, no, you know, I can do all of the things all of the time and be fine.
Yeah, that's the thing I say a lot working with like those medical professionals I work with, and then it reminds me of like, oh yeah, Jer, like same thing. You're not some sort of special human because of your job. Your body works the exact same way. Like at some point you will run out. I burned out post COVID. I was in higher ed and doing therapy, and I was just doing too many things. But I also think like that idea of cultivating joy is a big one. I noticed in my own work, I was so focused on stress relief with people, and then it took kind of me going through my own burnout to be like, oh yeah, like stress relief is very important, but there's another component or that next step of like cultivating joy or creating space for nonsensical silly things and having fun and like creating space for happiness, not this like endless pursuit of it, but like just allowing it to exist. And so I think that's shifted a little bit through personal experience, but then in my work too, to be like, yes, stress relief is the starting point, not like the end goal. We don't get to just check that box off and be happy, healthy people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, that's one of the things that I love about this work, right? Is that like if we're doing our own, right? If we're doing our own work, like the windows that it will open up within the work we do with other people, are as expansive as they can be. I had a, supervisor once, like, and I'm sure he was quoting somebody say that, like, we can only take our clients as deeply as we're willing to go ourselves. And like when we talk about
Mhm.
cultivating joy and wonder and caring for ourselves in a capitalist society, that is deep level stuff because we're not taught to do that. We're taught to produce, right? And to
Right.
like check the boxes. And so I think that is like some of that deep work that again is like very simple but like very hard to master. And I know that my own process in therapy and my own like growth has like certainly like I'm definitely a better therapist for it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm going to do some rapid fire questions, which I didn't prep ahead at all or let you know about. You talked about loving music and you're from Maryland. So I have to ask if you know who Dan Deacon is.
I do not.
He's like a weird, chubby redhead who does like experimental electronica. He was just in Milwaukee. I saw him recently, like earlier this month. He was in Milwaukee and I saw him and I was like, oh, that'd be so weird if you knew. He's from Baltimore and makes the fact that he's from Baltimore a big deal in a lot of his music. So
I'm
I
writing
was
him down right now, actually.
yeah,
Um,
he's a delight. I mean, if you like weird electronica, he's a delight.
I like electronica. We'll see how weird it is. One of my partners is like really into synths, and so like I'm like I can handle your breathy things, but when you get into those very strange sounds, like that's not for me. So we'll see.
Sure. So what do you like to listen to for music?
Well, I think I just like found my summer soundtrack and it's like it's like a high vibrations playlist. So a lot of electronica, like, lots of treble and like high pitches and dancy little beats. I don't know that I can give it like a particular like name, but I listen to like a lot of Govinda and Polish Ambassador and pretty much all electronica, except like with the occasional like bits of like Rising Appalachia and like some like hardcore old school bluegrass like thrown in there too. Sometimes you can't listen to a like banjo and not be super happy.
Sure.
So mostly electronica, mostly high vibe stuff. At least that's what Spotify is calling it. I couldn't tell you if it's like house or deep tech. I know I like liquid bass, so there's one, but usually I just let the internet decide for me.
Sure. Do you listen to music while you're hiking and out in nature, or do you kind of keep them separate?
Yeah, no, no, no. I don't listen to music when I'm out in nature. Like if I'm walking around my neighborhood, like sometimes like I'll put my headphones in and like listen to music while I walk, but when I'm in the woods, like I'm listening to the breeze and I'm listening to the river and I'm listening to all of the birds. Like yesterday I like did my sessions right after the rainstorm that we had here, and it was just like cacophony of like all of these like beautiful bird songs. They were so excited that the rain was gone. So yeah, no, I get the sound bath experience when I'm out in the woods.
Sure. Awesome. I like to ask everybody, what are you reading or what are you watching? Like what's kind of your recreational stuff? Most of the therapists are reading super nerdy like therapy books. So I have to throw in what are you watching to get some actual recreation in there.
Well, like I said, I'm reading All About Love by Bell Hooks right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just started rewatching The West Wing. Um, so
Okay.
which is, hilarious because they're still talking about the same stuff that's still happening now. So that's like kind of interesting to be watching it. But you know, it just makes me very happy. I think we were watching Andy and I were watching Suits before that. So that was pretty good. Nothing current yet. I want to go see the new Spider-Verse movie, but that's about all I've got on my entertainment plate in that way for the future.
Yeah, for sure. I haven't seen it yet. I have a 5-year-old. He and I just watched the first one. Came out in 2018 or whatever. Because I wanted to see if he could handle it. I'm not sure he's quite ready for the theater experience of a movie yet. That might be a little intense.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, if people want to, I have my other question. So I told someone who would have no way of knowing who you were that I was interviewing you, forgetting that I'm geographically in Wisconsin. The starting running back for the Green Bay Packers, his name is Erin Jones. So I said, I'm interviewing Erin Jones. And they were like, the Packer? And I was like, oh, no. So I don't know if you have heard of Erin Jones, the football player, but you guys share a name, just spelled differently.
I have not heard of that, but you know, that's cool. Like, I'll be mistaken for a football player. Like, that could be pretty entertaining, I think.
Yeah. He'd be famous in Wisconsin and maybe nowhere else, but he's a celebrity here.
Word.
So Erin, if people want to find out more about you, if they were interested in working with you and contacting you, what do you got out there? How do people find you?
I kind of tend to do most of my business word of mouth. I don't have like a huge internet presence, but I can be found on Psychology Today, or you can just email me at erin@holisticpathways.org. Yeah, that's pretty much like how I can be found. And you know, if you don't want to see me but want to do something good, you can donate to the Trevor Project. But yeah, that's about it. I don't really have a website. Maybe I'll do one of those like at some point within the next year. But I've been saying that for like I've been saying since I started, and
Sure.
you know, I've been pretty much booked solid full from the get-go, and I don't see that changing as the need for mental health services like dramatically increases and more people need therapy. So
Yeah,
I'm
for
fine,
sure.
fine hiding and not having to answer too many emails.
Rather be out in the woods. We will of course have those links in the show notes for those of you who are unfamiliar. Hopefully nobody is. The Trevor Project is a wonderful organization that works with LGBTQ plus youth. And they are a great group to donate to. So we'll have a link for them in the show notes as well. I'm Jeremy. All my stuff is at wellnesswithjared.com, all my media and other stuff. And the podcast is now up on the website, which took me longer than it should have for my own reasons. No, my media person continues to be awesome and amazing. So Erin, thank you so much for joining today. This was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jared. This is really wonderful. You're so lovely, and I just like wish you like all of the success. It's like it's really nice to meet a like-minded soul on the other side of the country, right?
Yeah, for sure. And to everybody out there listening, thanks for tuning in once again. We will be back with another new episode next week. Take care, everyone.